There is such an interesting passage in the book of Genesis that most readers, afraid to dwell on it too much, simply skim straight past it. 6 verses, hidden between a genealogy and a flood. It has been added without any explanation and without any effort to make the content easier to understand. These 6 verses describe such a shocking event that the ancient world has built an entire library of commentaries around them, and the modern world acts as if these were mere metaphors. They are not a metaphor. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took as wives whomever they chose. This sentence, plain, declarative, almost informal in tone, is the opening line of a disaster. Breach that has sent shockwaves through every dimension of the constructed reality. It was such a profound act of rebellion that its consequences did not come to an end with the flood that was expected to wipe them out. The repercussions are still being felt. We are living amidst those repercussions. This is not some ancient myth that has nothing to do with your life. The deeper context of this story is the tale of a journey stretching from a mountain called Hermon to a valley called Elah, the place where a shepherd boy gathered 5 smooth stones, and the place where he changed the course of history. This is the story of what happens when the boundary between heaven and earth is crossed without permission. What arises from this intersection and what is required to reverse it. This will give you a different perspective on the Bible stories you are familiar with. That's how it should be. To understand what has fallen, we must first understand what is standing. Creation was orderly by its very nature. It was organized not only by the way the filing system was structured, but also by the way the music was arranged, where every note has a position and a function and a relationship to every other note. And all this only works on one condition, as long as the relationships remain strong. If you damage these relationships, you'll run into trouble. The world before the flood was becoming noise, but it did not start that way. The world before the flood was gradually turning into a cacophony, but it wasn't like that in the beginning. In the line of Yavid, the father of Enoch, 5 generations from Adam. Then, order still prevailed, however fragile it might be. Humanity was spreading across the globe. The memory of Eden had not yet faded entirely. Even though those walks were now over, people still remembered what it meant to walk in God's presence. Here is this world. A world where, though the content has begun to decay, it still retains the shape of an order, that the decision was made. Texts that provide the most detailed account of what happened next, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were known to the authors of the New Testament. Jude quotes directly from the Book of Enoch. Peter's letters bear traces of this structure. These letters were studied by the early church fathers, and then they were set aside. What they describe is this: 200 angels, referred to in the texts as overseers, beings tasked with watching over and protecting humanity. They looked down from the observation posts and made a decision. They were created to watch over, yet they chose to desire. They had been given a task, but instead they chose to desire, and they went down. Their leader was a figure named Semyaza. The text reflects his hesitation. He said to his friends, "I'm afraid that perhaps you won't actually go through with this, and I alone will pay for this great sin." His friends replied, we all swear together and bind ourselves with curses, so none of us will be coming back. The location was Mount Hermon. Its Hebrew name means dedicated to destruction. Regardless of whether this name was given before the event or because of it, its meaning is entirely consistent. They came down. The texts say that when they arrived, the world shook, that their forms were radiant in a way that the human eye was not designed to process. Not a soothing brightness, though, a blinding brightness, like that of a lightning bolt, the sort of brightness you cannot look at directly. Two-faced beings belonging to a species fundamentally different from humans. Stepping out of the dimension they inhabit, they are stepping into a dimension they were not created for. And the first consequence of their arrival was neither violence nor corruption. The first consequence was admiration. Those who saw them could do nothing but stare. The children born of these unions were not human. They weren't angels, just like their father. These were things that creation could not have foreseen. Something that exists in the void between two planes of existence that were never intended to overlap. The texts refer to them as Nephilim. They were, quite literally, giants. The Book of Enoch states that they were 300 cubits tall. Leaving aside whether this figure is real or symbolic, the important point is this. These were things that exceeded the scale of anything that could arise naturally. They were impossible by the standards of the world they were born into. And they were hungry. At first, the Nephilim consumed all that the earth had to offer. Then they began to consume the things that the earth could not replenish quickly enough to satisfy them. Then they turned on the animals. Then they turned on the humans. The texts describe a systematic collapse of the created order, a hunger so absolute that it did not function like an appetite, but rather like entropy. Everything the Nephilim touched was swept towards oblivion. However, the observers did not merely bring a biological catastrophe. They also brought knowledge. Azazel taught humans to forge weapons of iron and bronze. He taught the arts of ornamentation and seduction. The subjects taught by the other watchers included astronomy, astrology, the use of medicinal plants, and techniques for casting spells. None of these were given for free. There was some loss with every transfer. This information was not wrong in itself. These elements existed within the celestial order for legitimate purposes. What was wrong was the context. Information extracted from its own context does not lead to progress when placed within a structure that is not prepared for it. It produces catastrophe dressed in the language of advancement. The earth filled with violence. The texts say that the groans of the world rise up to the heavens. The spirits of those who were destroyed cried out loudly. The world cried out directly to its creator, for order had been so thoroughly shaken at its very foundations that the creation was beginning to lose its ability to sustain life. And heaven heard. In the midst of corruption, God exalted a man, not a warrior, not a king, not a politician who might negotiate a compromise, a prophet, a man whose weapon is words, whose domain lies on the boundary between the visible and the invisible. He was the seventh from Adam. In a genealogy of men who simply lived and died, Enoch is the exception. Neither because he had gained political power, nor because he had won a military victory. but because the text says something about him that it says about no one else before Noah. Enoch walked with God. In a generation that has ceased to walk with God, in a world where the Watchers descended to earth and the Nephilim devoured everything, Enoch walked with God. In that world, walking with God meant rejecting all the shortcuts at one's disposal, to refuse the knowledge the Watchers were selling, to refuse the protection of the Nephilim, to reject the majority. For they had decided that if you could not oppose the new order, adapting to it was not such a bad option after all. Enoch refused. He did not put forward a theological argument as the reason for his rejection. He neither wrote an article nor organized a protest, nor did he gather supporters. He simply carried on walking in the direction he always walked. This is the path shown by God. It was the exact opposite direction to the path taken by everyone around him. And in return for this refusal, he was granted access. He was taken up to the heavenly palaces, and things that had never before been revealed to any human were revealed to him. He saw the throne. He saw the books of judgment. He saw the chambers where the Watchers were awaiting their sentence. He saw the cries of innocent souls rising from the earth. He saw the answer that was being prepared. And then he was sent back to deliver a message. He passed through the ruined cities left behind by the Nephilim. He walked through the territories of the Watchers, where people were worshiping the beings who had descended, as if they were gods. Because, when viewed from a purely experimental perspective, they were indistinguishable from gods. They were so powerful we couldn't comprehend it. They were glowing brightly. They were terrifying. They bestowed upon mankind fire, war, and the art of seduction. Why should you not worship them? Enoch stood in the midst of it all and said, "They are not gods, they are rebels, and the day of judgment is drawing near." Most people laughed. The ones who did not laugh were the Watchers themselves. They heard Enoch's words, and they were afraid. The beings who descended to earth, who upon their arrival shook the earth, the beings who are the fathers of creatures of unimaginable magnitude, they were afraid of an old man who walked with God, and recounted what had been revealed to him. They sent a message through him. They asked him to intercede with the Creator on their behalf. They dictated letters. They gave him their petitions and asked him to carry them to the throne. Enoch carried the letters and came back with the answer. "There will be no peace for you." The petition was denied. The verdict had long since been passed. There was no decision to be made. It had already begun to be carried out in the courts of heaven. Your children, the Nephilim, will be destroyed before your very eyes. You will be bound and imprisoned in the earth. The world you have corrupted will be purified, and you will watch everything. The observers felt something for the first time, something they had apparently never felt before: fear. However, they no longer had time to make a different choice. Heaven moved against the chaos it had permitted for the appointed time. 4 archangels received their assignments. Raphael was sent to bind Azazel. He found him in the wilderness of Dudail, bound him hand and foot, cast him into darkness, covered him with rough and jagged rocks, and sealed him there until the day of judgment. Gabriel was sent among the Nephilim, not to fight them directly, but to turn them against one another. For beings born of sin carry sin by their very nature, and the Nephilim had never learned the art of cooperation. Gabriel hastened a process that was already inevitable. Alliances were broken. Clans turned against one another. The wars between the giant nations consumed them from the inside. Michael was sent to bind the remaining watchers and cast them under mountains of stone. The texts describe their prisons as fire and darkness simultaneously. Not merely the absence of light, but the existence of everything designed to block that light. Uriel was sent to earth to warn Noah. A flood was coming. Not simply water falling from sky, a rupture of the deep. The texts describe how this works as follows. The springs of the great depths begin to burst forth, whilst the windows in the sky release what they hold within. A hydraulic disaster of such magnitude that it would recreate the entire surface of the planet. Noah had to know this, and Noah had to build. Noah was not a spectacular man. The text does not mention that he was tall, strong, or handsome. It says he was a man of virtue. He was without fault amongst the people of his time. He walked with God. The same phrase used for Enoch. In a world where the Nephilim were the standard of power and the Watchers were the standard of knowledge, the greatest praise that could be bestowed was this: he walked with God. God told him what was coming. God told him what to build. 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high, cypress wood, rooms, compartments, a window. Its characteristics were very clear because its purpose was very clear. This was not a ship built for exploration. This was a ship built for survival. The people around Noah watched him build, and when someone did something that seemed to make no sense at all, they asked the sort of questions people always ask. Where is your God? Why is he silent while you do all this work? What do you think is going to happen? Noah didn't reply. He carried on building. There is a kind of faith that looks from the outside indistinguishable from obsession. They do not wait for external approval before taking action based on what they see. It seems absurd until it becomes clear that it isn't, and by that time, it is usually too late for the audience to change their minds. The animals came of their own accord, without being herded. 2 of every kind. With a determination that defied explanation, they were making their way towards the ship. The birds that took up residence in the structure Noah built. Predators and their prey, who should have brought chaos to an otherwise orderly world, but instead cooperation emerged. Creation, in its deepest instinct, realized what was to come and turned towards the only refuge it could reach. Noah and his family entered. God closed the door. The Nephilim believed that their colossal bodies would save them. Some tried to cling to the ship. They did not succeed. Others climbed to high ground and waited for the water to stop rising. It did not stop. The sky did not explain. It only continued. After 40 days and 40 nights, the water covered everything. The mountains themselves disappeared beneath the surface. The civilization founded by the Nephilim, towers, temples, cities built upon the foundations of forbidden knowledge, has vanished. The Nephilim were gone. But the spirits of the Nephilim were not. The bodies of the giants vanished, but the spirits of the beings born between 2 worlds could find no home of their own. That place where human souls go, they were not human enough. They were not angelic enough to return to the place where their father had fallen. They were, in the language of the ancient texts, homeless. And homeless spirits do not rest. They roam about, They lie in wait for any opportunity to enter any host they can reach. They are the incorporeal hunger of beings whose bodies have perished, yet whose appetites remain undimmed. They are what the tradition would eventually call demons. This is not a metaphor, nor is it an attempt predating the birth of science to explain mental illness, but real spiritual beings with real histories, real names, and real purposes. They had survived the flood. In that state, weightless and adrift, they would wait. The ark settled on the mountains of Ararat. Noah opened the window. He sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water dried up. He sent out a dove, and it came back with nothing. He sent it again, and it came back with an olive leaf. He sent it a third time, and it did not come back at all, which meant the earth was dry enough to land. Noah stepped out of the ark. He stepped into a world that had been made anew. No cities, no towers, no altars to the watchers, no roads built by giants. The landscape was new in the way a field is new after a fire, cleared, silent, holding the memory of what had been there in the very shape of the emptiness.
The first thing he did was to build an altar. It was not to explore the land, nor was it to establish a defensible position. He built an altar and offered burnt offerings. And the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans." A covenant was made. A rainbow was placed in the sky as its seal. And then the work of repopulating the earth began. Deep within the subsequent family trees, if you do not know what it is you are seeking, they lie almost imperceptibly the first signs of a return. From among the descendants of Ham in the land of Canaan, certain names appear. Certain bloodlines produce, across several generations, people whose physical descriptions echo what the pre-flood texts had recorded about the Nephilim. But they are not ordinary humans either. The giants came back. When Moses sent the 12 spies into the land of Canaan, 10 of them returned with a report that shook the faith of an entire nation. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. The problem was not merely what the spies saw. The real problem was the effect that seeing this had on how they perceived themselves. The giants did not merely occupy a physical space. They also took hold of the inner worlds of the people who looked upon them. Fear is always a theological problem before it is a practical one. 2 of the 12 spies did not give this report. Joshua and Caleb stood before the same evidence and said, "Do not be afraid of the people in those lands, for we will destroy them. They have no protection left, but the Lord is with us." The same data, completely different conclusion. The difference was not bravery in the ordinary sense. This is a completely different kind of calculation. Joshua and Caleb were not calculating the giant's size. They were calculating the nature of God who stood by their side.